Man, that Pokemon with the sword in his mouth, that dude's baller. Like, he's awesome. Anyway, so I know I haven't written up the directions for the final assignment yet. It's going to be pretty simple. I know I've explained it pretty well, but it's also probably pretty appropriate to write out those directions so you have like a checklist to look at. I promise I'll get to that soon. We are looking at the last, 2.5 weeks, if that. So we are very much running up onto the end of this semester. What I want to talk to you about today, we're going to continue with the idea of existentialism, but I want to talk a little bit about the specifics of how existentialism is just really getting thrown out of control, and introduce to you a few new terms, some philosophical ideas that I think make Mother Night even more interesting if you understand what's being brought to it. So anyway, we got our character, Howard W. Campbell Jr., which, by the way, if you're interested in reading more Kurt Vonnegut, also appears in the novel Slaughterhouse-Five, which I've got on my shelf. I never read it before because I'm terrible, but I'm going to definitely read it after this experience. Now, Howard Campbell Jr., when we first meet him, is very much not what I would call a hero. He is very self-centered. He does not care very much about the world that exists outside of his own little tiny universe. He is in Germany. He's hanging out with his wife. He does his little plays. He knows that the world is basically on fire, but he just doesn't care. All he cares about is the little world that he is cultivating with his wife. What was her name? Helga. And he's happy. Now, he is American, and he is in a country that is growing more and more hostile. And at some point, you can't continue to turn your back on what's happening in the wider world. At some point, it starts knocking on your door. Again, kind of an interesting sort of correlation we could draw here is the fact that for a while we knew COVID-19 existed. We knew it was out there. We felt extremely insulated from it, right? And now all of a sudden it's banging on our door. It's here. And now we have to react to it. So Howard is approached by this agent, this person who wants him to go undercover or wants him to become an agent for the Allies. Howard's attitude to this is very cavalier, and here that is important to history. He is essentially going to have his cake and it too. He's going to transmit these codes, and the codes that he is using to communicate information to the Allies, it's almost contrived, but it's definitely not necessarily out of the bounds of realism, because the way that he communicates is through pauses, coughs, and weird little patterns of his speech are how he's transmitting these messages. So in essence, Howard Campbell is almost completely indetectable as an agent. Now, you can sit here and you can say that it's unrealistic. Maybe it is. But this actually speaks to a very interesting point from an existentialist standpoint. Are you being heroic and works within the realm of Nazi Germany as a propagandist, right? He's transmitting all this horrible anti-Semitic literature. He is the mouthpiece for the Third Reich. And his identity as a weapon is extremely sharp because he is American. He is basically a gun that is being used against the Americans. He's one of yours. He agrees with us, right? But what he does, there's virtually no being exposed outside the realm of just suspicion, right? People questioning more along the lines of his Americanness, but not necessarily ever putting together the fact that he's spitting codes into his broadcasts, right? So already we have a complicated idea of what our hero is supposed to be. He does not have to face any consequences in Nazi Germany for his actions. He's immune to it. Nobody knows who he is. Now, for an existentialist reading, we have a very complicated sort of twist of authenticity. Who is Howard Campbell Jr. really? Is he a Nazi sympathizer, or is he an agent for the Allies? The real answer to that question is he is both. He transmits propaganda. He is extremely good at bringing people over to the ideological beliefs of Nazism. That does a lot of damage. That is extremely damaging. He's very good in both roles. His skill in propaganda is mostly what insulates him from suspicion. And there's several quotes throughout the book where someone really high up in the Third Reich, really high up Nazi, says to him, even if you were a double agent, even if you were one of the main things that brought us down in the end, you served us far better than you could ever have served the Allies. So, compounds and compounds. He is whisked away in the after days of the war, when things are starting to fall apart, when the Nazis begin to put two and two together and see that their defeat is inevitable. He manages to slip away, and he comes back to America, and he keeps his name, which is absolutely horrendous, but he keeps his name, and he manages to go under the radar, and partially because he is being protected by the intelligence agencies that had him in Germany to begin with. So Howard Campbell Jr., for the most part, never has to pay a price for most of his life. He stays hidden. He stays weirdly anonymous. The thing that causes him the most pain in his life is the death of his wife. The only thing that ever mattered to him was his wife. There's really no sense of true patriotism here. Why did he ever become an agent in the first place? He was never a political guy. His plays didn't seem to be particularly political, even though they were popular. He's just there. He's just almost like a weird part of the scenery. Now, the existentialist concept that I wanted, Sartre was amazing. Heidegger was another one. And there's something really interesting about Heidegger as well. Sartre and his philosophy developed in the French Resistance in World War II. And he hated Nazism, and he hated the people in trial at Nuremberg. Heidegger was a bona fide member of the Nazi Party, and he never really recanted it. He didn't seem to be necessarily involved in Semitism, but it's one of the big kind of, everybody knows the secret, but nobody wants to talk about it for people who study philosophy. Heidegger's complicated because of his Nazi Party membership, and he doesn't seem to have aggressively recanted it. But Heidegger was extremely influential, and his ideas are still like bandied about, and are, if you take an intro to philosophy class, you're going to study Heidegger. Now, Heidegger had this idea of Dasein, which is being there. Now, he looked at the concept of being and identity, and looked at the concept of what it is right now, because it's all, I don't really want this video to go into 5 hours, right? But in his discussion of being versus being in the world, a concept comes to me, and I think about how, we live our lives and how we decide who we are, what is proper conduct, blah. I think about this crap a lot, probably a little bit too much. Thrownness is this idea. You're born into the world, right? You're a little kid, you grow up, you gradually learn to adopt certain morals, certain beliefs, mostly based upon what your parents think. Your parents have a great deal of control into the person that you will eventually become. Now, not everyone gets the privilege of confronting the ideals and the beliefs that their parents kind of sort of superimposed upon them. And so, like, one of the most important points in a person's life is when you look honestly at your beliefs and you start thinking, is this true? Is this a good belief to hold? Do I need to reevaluate the things that I just accept, what you call a priori? A lot of us kind of live our lives with a lot of what we would call a priori belief. Again, I don't want to get too much into theology or religion here. I know this is a really weird literature discussion video, but just bear with me for a minute. A lot of us, when it comes to religious thinking, most of how we think religiously is a priori. We just assume that it's true. We don't think about it very much. We don't question it. And to question religious belief is to, kind of tempt faith a little bit, to think that, if we start looking at our beliefs through the lens of rational thinking, the fear is that we might stop believing it, right? And so a lot of the most important beliefs that we hold in our life are dependent upon assuming that something is a priori. It's just true. Now, as you grow up, you make a huge step into the world. And as you assume more responsibility, as you look for your role in the world, there is a lot of conflict. There is a lot of garbage that's going on, and you just sort of find yourself in the middle of it. You're not connected to the stuff that's happened in the past, and yet now you are part of what is being built for the future. And that actually causes us a lot of anxiety because as much as I hate to do this because of how controversial it is, one of the best examples I can think of this is maybe the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been fueled by atrocities. I mean, atrocities of all types that have come from all directions. Now, as a Palestinian, I'm going to do this from both sides because of how controversial this is. As a Palestinian child, you grow up with a lot of information being transmitted to you about how bad the Israelis are. As an Israeli child, you grow up with a lot of information about how bad the Palestinians are. Things that the Palestinians have done, things that the Israelis have done. Whether or not there's even truth to most of what you've learned doesn't matter because you're taking all this information in a priori, right? So you come into this conflict. As you grow into adulthood, you have a whole set of expectations and a whole set of assumptions about what the world is in your place. One, I never killed anyone. No one's ever even had the opportunity to hurt me yet. I'm just here. I'm just kind of this fly on the wall that's been dragged into this war. I personally have had no part in it. We deal with thrownness, with this Dasein, as Heidegger calls it. We deal with this by what Howard Campbell Jr. is running into here, I think, and what is a major motivator for his conduct and his behavior throughout the novel is the fact that he's found himself in a world that is just absolutely set on two sides of the conflict. He becomes a double agent because he has this deep-seated assumption that that's what he's supposed to do, not because he wants to. Now, and this is one of the greatest real, and I'm going to use this term even though it could get me in trouble. Existentialism has a tendency to give you a giant middle finger on morality. Things that you would assume are moral aren't, because you're doing them for the wrong reason. How most of us would assume that Campbell and his decision to become a double agent is the right thing to do. But is it, though? Is it? Not necessarily. Now, again, it's kind of weird to think, well, you're supposed to help the Allies. He's not doing it for the right reason. He's doing it because he just feels that that's the way he's supposed to go. And that's going to cause problems of authenticity. He's not being authentic. His friendships, his family relationships, his connection to the world is predominantly German, predominantly Nazi. His world is Nazism, to the point that he feels a bit like a traitor to the people that he is. And he is a traitor. He is traitorous to the people who have provided for him. But they're Nazis. Isn't that what you're supposed to do with terrible people who are mass murderers? This is a confusion and a blend of morality that is collapsing upon itself. It's a big giant vacuum that's sucking everything good into it and rendering it into like a rotten pus or something. There is no center to hold on to anymore. Mainly because Campbell, he's not making decisions because of his sense of morality. He's just sort of going with instinct, which is an extremely dangerous thing to do when you have such complex interplay of morality going on. So I can't sit here and tell you that, and this is kind of one of those grand sort of truths about literature. I can't sit here and tell you that existentialism was primarily the motivator for Vonnegut to write Mother Night. I feel in my heart of hearts that Vonnegut had to know all this. He absolutely had to in order to write a story that is just this, is showing this stuff so beautifully. But I'd have to go and dig for evidence of it. And that's kind of where me as a scholar, I've gotten a bit lazy because I read these books and I come up with these theories, but I never write about them anymore because, well, I'm not being forced to. And that doesn't pay the bills, right? This is the type of stuff that a literature professor, a literature theorist is supposed to do in order to try to find that kind of recognition. And it's a really hard life to live in as you try to build this stuff together and try to transmit in a form that's entertaining, or at least something that some Poindexter somewhere in a suit and pinstripes and really big glasses is going to be like, just it's so unbelievably clever. But this is essentially what we do and how we gain that notoriety. And for me, this is what makes the story good, is the fact that we want to sympathize with Campbell. We want to say he's a hero, but on an evaluation of being true to oneself and making decisions for a true authentic reason and being, understanding of one's place in the world and like being really mature about it, he is very complicated. And in actuality, there's a lot of arguments to say that Campbell may have done a lot more damage to the world than he might have healed, which I think might be a good discussion question for this week. Now, I'm going to stop making all these discussion forums. You can go back to the Mother Night discussion forums and just answer this question. In what ways has Campbell done more damage to the world than good? And this is something that comes up quite a lot if you finish the novel. And think about the scenes as we get towards the back end of the novel. How has Campbell's act of quote unquote heroism been more damaging than it has been good? And this is where we can actually kind of start to think about some connections with our own modern political world too, which is fun. I like modern politics, but again, I have to be careful because, as much as I want to light certain political figures on fire, rhetorically, of course, not literally. Jesus Christ, YouTube moderators. I don't mean literally. I mean like lambast. As much as I want to mock and deride certain political figures, I got to avoid that because I think it might be actually easy to write positive political opinions of people using Mother Night, as well as the ones that I would use it to tear people down. It's very possible. Anyway, I'm tired. I want to go play Pokemon, but I don't have enough money to buy Pokemon. You know what I really want to do? I want to go to a pizza restaurant. and I want to get a big pizza. I want to go to Mellow Mushrooms. That's what I want to do. I want to get a mighty meaty with some bacon and some sausage, and I'm just talking, that's what I want. Hopefully soon. You guys take care of yourselves. Be safe.